Thank you very much. By the way, Shodan is a term taken from karate. Our next speaker is Mr. Ilias Chantzos. He is a Senior Director at Symantec Government Affairs Program for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, as well as the Asia Pacific and Japan regions. Prior to joining, he worked as Legal and Policy Officer in the Directorate General Information Society of the European Commission, focusing on information security policy. He served as Vice President of the Executive Board of Tech America Europe, an appointed member of the Permanent Stakeholder Group of ENISA. Mr. Chantzos chaired 2 terms the European Policy Council of the Business Software Alliance. Please welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak to all of you. It's been so far a very interesting discussion, and I felt actually that the way Mr. Reed concluded his presentation was a very good segue in what I'm about to speak to you today, because I work for Symantec, but let's say rather than me standing up and talking to you today about what a great technology we got and how we're going to solve all the problems, I thought that it might be a better way to spend our time, rather than focusing a discussion on arms control or offensive or warfare, on what do we actually need to do about defending ourselves. How are we going to do deterrence by denial? How are we actually going to stop the cyber attacks? So if I look at this for a moment, why are we even discussing about cyber defense? What is the thing that has really changed the game? I'm now 9 years almost with Symantec, and quite frankly, I've been even longer in the information security space. So what happened, and suddenly, cybersecurity has been catapulted to the political significance level that people are treating it as a tier 1 threat. Well, the very simple, very short answer is incidents. We've been attacked. We had a number of major security incidents. We had a number of major incidents that have affected countries, that have affected infrastructures, and made people understand that the threat is very real. I see my Estonian colleagues being here in the room. I've seen people from many different other jurisdictions. When I look at it from a European perspective, yes, Estonia back in 2007 was a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call for all of us. What do we see cyber being used for? What do people do when they're launching those cyber attacks? What are these incidents that we've seen affecting the different countries and affecting the different critical infrastructures? Well, previous speakers have mentioned some examples. From my perspective, we see things that start to resemble more and more with signaling intelligence. We see things that start to resemble more and more with sabotage and electronic warfare. And obviously, other speakers talked about subversion. I refer to it as PSYOPs. And you know what? It is becoming more and more nebulous. We do have incidents that we believe that are state-sponsored. There are other incidents that, quite frankly, we can identify a single individual state. We used to separate attackers into well-meaning insiders, malicious insiders, and external attackers, hackers. In that category now, we're looking at politically motivated attacks. But these politically motivated attacks could be motivated with all sorts of political objectives, ranging from, I don't like my government, all the way to, my government told me to do it. And, attribution, deniability are always there. But what is very, very interesting is that now cyber is linked to political tensions. Think about it for a moment. I'm here in Israel. When you had the challenges with your neighbors and the breaking of the naval blockade of the Gaza Strip, there have been security incidents. We look at other places around the world that are becoming hot spots, that there are sparkling political tensions, territorial disputes. Again, the dispute comes with cyber activity. If I look at the Israeli environment, and these are statistics that Symantec produced in April 2013, we see, that you are a very connected country. At the same time, you're a country which is, in a tense environment and in a geopolitically unstable environment. And you see also that reflected in the numbers. You look at Israel, it's number 2 in terms of the source of attacks, the source of cyber attacks in the Middle East. You look at the most popular infections within Israel, and actually you look numbers, you see malware like Configure. So there's a case to be made. We talk about critical infrastructure, we talk about protecting the large enterprises, we talk about protecting the government and the defense systems, but actually, if one takes a step back, we also need to be looking as to what are we going to do to protect our consumers, what are we going to do to protect our own population, our small and medium enterprises, because they're being used, they're being exploited to launch cyber attacks. So it's all about having a strategy, it's all about having a plan, it's all about being able to take your environment, take your national strategy, your national security strategy, and bring the cyber component into it. I will tell you that what we always say as Symantec to any government around the world is that you cannot any longer have a national security strategy without a strong cyber component. And quite frankly, that's something that we see many, many countries now taking on board. And let's face it, Israel is among those driving it. So what do we need to think about? Well, you need to think about, first of all, that you're going to have known unknowns. And what are those known unknowns? Well, you know that you're going to be attacked, but you clearly don't know by whom, when, where, how. You know that you're going to be hit. And you have to accept the inevitable. You have to accept that there is a possibility that you will be compromised. You have to accept that you got to build your defense in such a way so as for you to be able to withstand the hit. Often I'm asked, are we losing the race? Are we losing the war, the arms race on cyber? And every time I'm answering the same way, that this is not just about the technology. It's about people, process as well. So it's about a holistic approach to the problem. And we need to be bearing in mind the unique features that, quite frankly, we see in cyber. Things like the asymmetry that cyber has, or the deniability. And in doing that, acquisition of intelligence, situational awareness, becomes a key component, becomes a key requirement, because without it, you don't have an early warning. So what do you need to be doing to defending what often in the military we refer to as the fifth domain? So obviously, you need to be prepared to defend it. You need to have the capability to do the defense. You need to be actually defending it. You need to be able to take that capability and roll it into practice. You need to be able to actually use it. And finally, saying that, and I'm going to counterattack, or I'm going to, cyber them back, that may not necessarily be the right answer. You need to be thinking about what kind of instruments of power you have in place and you can bring to bear in order for you to be able to react to the different instances. Ladies and gentlemen, let's face it. As I said, we're dealing with a nebulous world when it comes to cyber. Just because you've been cyber attacked, that doesn't mean it's a country. And even if it is a country, that doesn't mean that you cybering them back will actually have any effect if they're not really connected. So when we're talking about building the capability, what do we really have in mind? I talked about the planning bit, but clearly part of the planning will need to be identifying the critical infrastructure and recognizing what is that needs to be defended. And in doing that, then building the necessary level of resilience of the key assets. Let's face it, you can't defend everything. There will be a lot of things that need to be defended, but at the same time, you need to recognize that, as Frederick the Great said, the one who defends everything defends nothing. You will need to prioritize. Especially in developed economies, the question of the role of the private sector is always key. The question of how, let's say, the private sector needs to work together with industry with the government in order to do information sharing, in order to build the platforms of trust and cooperation which would allow a better response and a better early warning, which will allow a better understanding of the cyber environment. I think there are a number of examples in this area. I mean, the US recently issued their executive order trying to push better and more effective information sharing within the federal government. The European Union recently issued their Network and Information Security Directive trying to push at the member state level cooperation and information exchange. That's a difficult discussion right now within Brussels, and we need to see how exactly it will play out. UK, Germany, Netherlands, a number of other European countries have in place programs that they work and cooperate with their private sector. And obviously NATO has in place a number of, let's say, principles and mechanisms for collective defense and crisis management. So it is happening and it is there, and it involves the private sector, and that's a direction that I would say we see more and more the world going. I guess the other area is educating as well the users in the population, so making sure that your communities, and especially the small and medium businesses, are aware of the risk and the challenge. From a technological requirement standpoint, the capability ultimately has to do with real-time monitoring, with having national certs and having functional national certs that are able to do correlation, are able to do analysis, are able to do forensics, and respond to the incident. At a strategic level, we used to focus on protecting the data center. We used to focus on protecting the PC. That's not any longer the way to go. It's about protecting the information. It's about protecting the information and the identities. It's not any longer about protecting the hardware. And the more we move into mobile devices, the more we move into cloud, this is going to be a key requirement. I'm not telling you that you should not protect the endpoints. The endpoints are still likely to be the weakest link. Your traditional PC at home or at work is still likely to be the weak link, so you need to address that as well. But most importantly, it's a risk-based approach, and you need a comprehensive both redundancy and disaster recovery capability, because, as I mentioned, you will be hit. Now, what about intelligence? An intelligence-centric approach is key, but the reality as well is that the intelligence has become the default posture. Everybody's gathering data. So, we pile data and then we put them somewhere inside and we store them, and we don't do enough with them. That's a problem. There's no point in keeping intelligence or collecting intelligence without generating knowledge, without generating actionable items. So the challenge here is not really, let's say, gather data, but gather data, classify them, categorize them, prioritize them, analyze them in a way that will actually be meaningful to you. Don't collect event data, correlate them, make them incidents, understand what is the thing that you're trying to defend against. And if possible, attribute. So when it comes to actual defense, again, prioritization and focusing on things like containment. We said you will be hit. So focus on containing the threat, focusing on mitigating what is actually being hit, prevent the attacker from going any further. And especially when it comes to critical infrastructure operators, it's about continuity. It's about making sure that the power is not going to go out. It's about making sure that you can continue to have the service running. And to do that, you need to be monitoring real time, and obviously you need to be protecting in depth and at multiple points. The previous speaker spoke extensively on Stuxnet. I will tell you that when I was looking at the different layers that one would need to deploy in order to defend himself against a Stuxnet-like attack, I was impressed, because we are talking about many layers. We are talking about many different technologies that could block this type of attack, but at the same time, you need to have them there. And obviously, while all of this is happening, against the time, because you will be working against the clock, you need to be collecting intelligence about the attacker, which you can then use in order to try to attribute. So understand, what's the malware that's been used? What's the telemetry? Where's it coming from? How quickly, because it will probably be hopping around the malware, how quickly can people help you? Any strategy will have to address organizational questions. And as somebody who has been working for, let's say, a NASDAQ-listed company, first rule of management is have a neck to throttle. Make someone responsible. Somebody needs to be clearly responsible. You know what, actually in government, that's a difficult thing. I used to work in the European Commission. I can attest to that. It's not always easy to identify who needs to be responsible, but you need to try to do that. And also you need to try to have clear rules of engagement as to what's civilian, what's military, what's law enforcement, what's intelligence. And every time that you're dealing with an incident, what's the threshold that would justify them being involved? Very often in Europe, we talk about having the necessary laws, rules, regulations that would allow you to defend yourself. Quite frankly, very often in Europe, we have a situation that we have conflict of laws. We talk about information sharing, yet we have one of the strongest data protection regimes. So we need to try to find the right way, the right balance between how do we deal on one hand with sharing information on threats, on attacks, And at the same time, how do we do that in a way which is data protection friendly, which protects the privacy of the individuals? Another frequent problem in the cyberspace is getting the necessary skills, getting people skilled and being able to retain them. I was actually encouraged by the comments and the statements of your president earlier today, because exactly he seems to be having the right vision around getting the education, getting the talent and retaining it inside the country. I talked about information sharing. One of the most difficult organizational questions that countries are grappling right now is building the environment of trust. How do we get the people together around the table to share this data? Because it is sensitive, because it is tricky, and because it involves business interests, economic interests, competition requirements, and also liabilities. Perhaps another organizational point, regular exercises. We're doing a lot of that in Europe. NATO has been doing that. We're doing a lot of that in the US, and we as a company participate in several of those, and we even have our own program of exercises. Why? Because it's key. You got to put all this in practice to see how it's going to work. Otherwise, you know, every time you run an exercise, you walk out, you say you're happy, you did a good result, but that doesn't mean it has delivered what it actually is intended to. And finally, you have an incident, you have a cyber attack, you've contained it, you've managed it. So then the question is, what's the proportionate response? How do you deal with it? So what is the process that you've built in place to address things like the political, the diplomatic, the economic, potentially even the military response to it? I guess the key point for me, again, is to say that just because something happened on the cyberspace, the proportionate response might not be a cyber-related one. Richard Clarke spoke in at great length about what a coalition of the willing, of like-minded, can do in order to apply diplomatic, political, economic, electronic even pressure, and encourage you to reflect on all those options. What about deterrence? Many people link historically the discussion around deterrence with offensive capability, with, you know, we're going to hit them back. And I think it's fair to say that whereas traditional deterrence and sort of like, I got a bigger gun than you, or I've got many more aeroplanes or many more tanks than you, has historically worked well, I think that when it comes to cyber, it's reaching its limitations. Part of it has to do with the fact that cyber attacks and cyber operations in general are clandestine, deniable, and the declaratory policy is somewhat, let's say, of questionable effectiveness. You can show how many tanks you've got and how many planes. When it comes to cyber, what are you going to do? Show how many computers you've got in the room? It's not exactly convincing. Also, it's a capability that, yes, it is not easy to verify. And most importantly, when you choose to go down this path, exactly because doctrine is not yet fully developed, how should it be received by your opponent? Is this a first strike? Is this an escalation? Is it an indication of de-escalation, the fact that you choose to go cyber, perhaps not kinetic? Is it preparation of an intelligence collection before a physical attack, or some sort of effort to verify from his end that you're not going to be attacking first? So we're talking about preparedness to attack, or we're talking about reconnaissance. What is really the hidden incentive behind your actions? So I think this is what perhaps makes deterrence by offensive still a sort of like unclear and uncharted territory to go, and perhaps even a difficult one. Now, I think it's fair to say that certainly for Symantec, we're in the right sort of business. This is the kind of environment we are going to be faced, and the kind of challenges that we're going to be facing in the coming years. And at the same time that the national, regional, and all capabilities and strategies are still in development. I think that effective defense is going to prove a bigger sort of deterrence and denial to act against than a presumed offensive capability. So in that sense, I probably agree with the previous speaker. I think it's fair to say that there's no single magical solution, and that the approaches are going to be, and certainly no single technological solution. And the approaches will very much have to customize with the regional security realities. However, as we see more and more militarization of cyber, we're going to be seeing more and more as well that cybersecurity to move in the signaling intelligence, electronic warfare, strategic warfare direction, and that also military systems, communication platforms, command and controls, drones are going to be targeted by this kind of cyber attacks. Frankly, the more the conflicts evolve, the more we're going to see of this and become wiser. Thank you very much, and happy to take any questions.